Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Evolving Practice Podcast. I'm Dr. Bill Moss, and with my co-host.
Hello, everybody. I'm Dr. Sean Carey.
And in today's episode, we're going to, I don't want to say we're going to continue from our last one, but we're going to explore a theme that kind of came out of the last episode that we were discussing. We started referencing a lot of book titles and references along that were really supportive to our progression in the episode on progression. And we wanted to just talk a little bit about areas, texts that have been influential into areas of our life where we've experienced significant growth. Some of the books may be familiar, and we didn't talk about your favorite titles or my favorite titles prior to entering into this episode. We just assigned each other the task of coming up with like 4 to 8 titles that really felt helped us in unique ways. They may not be the books that were the most popular but they gave us like a niche kind of understanding of the self and our own progression. So I'm excited to dive in this with you and Sean and kind of see what you came up with as well.
Yeah, I'm excited with you too. And one of the things, like we from any different genre, so we didn't refer back and forth to that. I don't know what books that you picked, but it's going to be fun to go back and forth.
Yeah, and we referenced some great ones in that last episode, and I realized, like, I don't know how you feel about reading. It's definitely an important part of learning and growing. And I realize I go through seasons where I really like to learn and read and consume. And there's many different reasons why I find myself that I enjoy the process. And I think it stimulates a lot of ideas for myself. And I said this on the last one, but I like to read because it helps me to continue to be creative. So I enjoy to see what's out there. Sometimes books are very stimulating, and other times that I don't even like them the first time. And then if I go back through them again, they kind of hit differently. So I know you read a lot of fiction books as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, I do. I've always enjoyed fiction. I remember one of my earliest memories of childhood was my mother and I sitting on the couch. There was a fire going. It was like a winter day, and she was reading The Hobbit to me with all the different voices and characters and things. So it was very magical to me, and I've always liked those stories of the heroes and the heroines, and I think we can learn a lot from stories in that way.
Those great like American classic books for kids. They're like all the classics, like The Call of the Wild and Huckleberry Finn. One page is like text and one page is a picture. I was really into those as a kid, and I remember in 3rd grade just like reading a couple of them. I read in like a day. I was just really into them, and we have many of them. So this week I've been reading 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea to Ava. And I've been doing like all these voices with Captain Nemo and the pilot who's on or whatever. And I had never really I think I tried to read that story when I was a kid and get through it, but it's a good survey of understanding of the but I've been doing that. I've been reading her some of the classics, and like you said, I'm finding all the voices, and she always tells me, "Daddy, make it spicy." That's what she tells me.
I love that. What a great
make the story spicy. So maybe if I'm next time I'm reading my own book, if it's not really that entertaining, I'll have to just voice in my mind to create some excitement in the text.
I love that. I when I was a kid, I loved the Hardy Boys, and that was a big thing for me. I was obsessed with those. And there was like the Boxcar Children. I really liked that. That was another cool series. And then like different childhood books. Like I remember Where the Wild Things Are was a big one for me.
Oh, I love that book. Yeah.
That was great. Curious George was one of my favorites. My parents always teased me that I was like Curious George.
I liked Curious George. I went through a period of time though where I was nervous, anxious to read aloud. I mean, I think many people are, but I remember just not being very good in high school with reading comprehension. And I thought
Mm.
I just had quote poor reading comprehension, but it was like if I wasn't interested in what I was reading, it was a struggle. It definitely was. And I remember
Yeah.
the first book I read that I was really into was it was called Running with the Buffaloes, and it was a book about the University of Colorado um, cross country team, and like it recapped the whole season. And I like couldn't put the thing down, and I was just like, it was my senior year of high school, and
Yeah.
I was training harder and more. I read this book, and it was basically like this story slash journal of this team's adventure. And I remember being like, I like reading. I can't put this thing down. Like I can
Yeah.
understand everything about it. And I think that's when I started to realize, there was I really did have a good reading comprehension. I just didn't want to waste my time with things that I didn't have see perceived value in.
Yeah.
If I couldn't focus on it, and I think still the titles that I chose tend to be the ones that I get kind of glued to and can grow with as we go.
I love that. Yeah, it's something that can be such a huge superpower for us. If I
Mm,
can jump in, there was just something that you said about not loving the yeah, being like self-conscious about reading. One of
mm,
the books that jumped to mind for me, like in this format, as far as the question we had for each other was just what's been impactful for you. So one
yeah.
of the first books that came to me was Remember Everything You Read, and it was
Mm.
this speed reading guide. And I taught
Ah,
myself how to speed read from this book. So it's for those who are on audio, it's
yeah.
Remember Everything You Read, the Evelyn Wood 7-Day Speed Reading and Learning Program by Stanley Frank. And this is probably like, I don't know, like a 30-year-old book. I've had it for literally decades. But
Mm,
I taught myself how to speed read like with it. This is years ago. And at one point, I was 18 years old and I was partying a lot. Like I had just got into partying. I was very innocent in high school. Then I went to college, 3 hours from home. My roommate was on the soccer team then, and we'd go out and party and have fun. And I did really well in my classes, but I was getting good grades, but wasn't really that challenged. And I started speed reading. And at one point, I almost dropped out of college because I was just getting more from like speed reading books in the library than I was like in my actual
mm.
classes.
Wow.
And but it was because of that book, like Remember Everything You Read. I started learning how to speed read, and
Mm,
there was something that happened for me where it was oftentimes where there's a hiccup for people is that our mind is going faster than like when we're sounding out the words. Because
mm,
when most people read, it's like you're actually sounding out the words in your head.
mhm,
But this talks about that, and it helps train you how to read with your eyes instead, so the eyes can process
mm,
much faster than we can auditorily.
mm,
And yeah, I did that, and it was a really cool experience because it just dramatically increased my ability to read and retain, which helped
mm.
for everything going forward. So that was a good foundational text for me.
That's awesome. I don't know if you ever heard this study with Strength Finder. One of the like studies that they reference is it has to do with speed reading, and it comes from the understanding of in Nebraska they did a reading assessment where they surveyed almost 6,000 students, and they got their reading levels. And I'm not going to botch that. I don't think I'm going to botch this, but they found like the average words per minute, I think, was like 140, something like
Yeah,
that. And then they found that there was a low group that was like 88, and then there was a high group that was around 300 or 330, somewhere in there. And they submerged the low end group, like the 80, 89 or 88, and then they took the other group, the high end group, this little niche group that was like way off the charts, around like 330, and they submerged them both into like a speed reading course. I think it was like a 6 weeks course. And then they
yeah,
retested them. And what they found was the low group went from 88 to like 125 or 130 or something, and it was a pretty significant improvement. But they put the other group in, and they went from like 330 to 2,700, something like that.
Wow.
So they
Wow.
took this group, and it was like they were already really good at this, right? They were
Yeah.
naturally gifted. They submerged them into this process, and they just completely thrived. So that kind of led me to, it's not exactly books. There are books, Strength Finder, but I'm a student of the Strength Finder process for probably like 8 or 9 years now. I worked with Jeremy Breckheisen, who's a trainer now in London with Gallup, and he inspired me in many ways. So I read like Eat, Move, Sleep, Strength-Based Leadership, and the Strength Finder 2.0. Those were really foundational in how I train people, especially in
Yeah.
my team. We all know each other's top 5, top 10 strengths, and it's really helped guide me. So I would go as far as saying that that text was one of the more impactful guides for me as a business owner and leader of people, if you will, in my organization.
I've taken that Strengths Finder test too, and I read that, and it was really valuable. And it's a very
Mhm.
like unique perspective, I think.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, it helps you get work with what's right with people, and like that's a
Yeah.
refreshing way to work with your team. So that was a really big start for me, and I think all those books, like I revisit them quite often, so I can reconnect with um, the importance of strengths, and also then just reviewing who my team is.
Yeah.
We've kind of just re-tapped back into that because I'm trying to take the leaders of my staff, like somebody like Caitlin, and so get her to continue to know more about all employees in the organization because it helps you work with them. So I found that to
Yeah.
be like one of the most helpful systems uh, of knowing the people I'm working with, and for them to know me. And it's good. It teaches you to um, like know where you're not good and be okay
Yeah.
with it, right? You're not trying to bring it up. You're not trying to take the weak aspects of you and bring them up. You're just trying to acknowledge them and then leverage the strengths. So um, that was a good segue from your book into one that I didn't actually pick,
Yeah. Yeah.
but, but kind of talked about. So good job there.
Thank you. You too.
Yeah, do it again.
So,
Do it again. What else do you got?
okay.
What else do you got?
Well, now I'm gonna pivot again just because this is the next book. Like I have a handful of books next to me. Um,
Okay.
here's one. This we kind of referenced last time. This is a book called Mastery by George Leonard,
Mm,
and it is a book really talking about the journey to mastery.
mm,
And it helped me to start thinking in a different way where it was I think before, especially like in our career with chiropractic, there are certain people who just like have a gift. And when I
mm,
was younger in practice, I tend to think of it was like you have a gift or you don't have a gift.
mm,
But really, it helped me like highlight the journey to mastery that everybody goes through, whether it's martial arts, whether it's cooking, whether it's
mm,
learning a language, like all these different aspects of like that journey to be like, okay, that's something that's actually attainable to me, and
mm,
there's a system to get there, and there are these it's really attainable to everybody. Like every person
mm,
out there can be a master at something that they choose to. It's
mm,
kind of what interests you so that you have the motivation to actually see it through. But
mm,
somebody can be a master of running, somebody can be a master of pottery. Like it's very repeatable.
mm,
So that was something that helped me to understand that, like, oh, I can actually develop mastery in my life.
that's cool. Yeah, I had a friend who always talked about writing. This sounds kind of similar. He was my friend Carl. I was the best man of his wedding years ago, but he always had this like theory around talent. And he's like,
Yeah.
he wanted to write a book that was really centered around the idea that um like you're the best at something, right? In
Yeah.
something you're like the most talented in. And like talented can be like cultivated in any way. And he was a runner, so he would use it as like, certain runners were more talented in certain aspects to understand it. Like you
Yeah.
were really good at like going to the well, this guy, and or this
Yeah.
person was really good at cycling their training and recovering. And this guy was really good at, never mentally being tough, but we all had like these talents that we brought to the table. And that seems like, mastery and the strengths, it kind of feels like those two things are very important in the level of progression and development, and growth. And I think that's why they're super important.
Yeah,
That's cool.
I've heard different martial artists talk about it too. The
Mm,
different, like, I think that's an area where you can really see it. And there's some people, like, I remember some Miss Dave talking about one of our Warriors of Light training, where part of it is martial arts. People
mm,
have different strengths. Somebody might be a bigger person. Somebody might
mm,
have kind of just a strong jaw, if you will. They're able to take a hit
mm.
well. Somebody else, they might be really good timing or something like that. Like, knowing your
Yeah,
different strengths, and then leveraging those.
that's good. That's cool.
Yeah.
Well, it kind of goes into my chiropractic world. I'm going to do my like first
Yeah.
chiropractic text. And I had the like kind of the blessing of being able to read. I had a really great chiropractor who inspired me to go to school, and I decided I was going to go to school like a year and a half before I actually made it to chiropractic school. Um, because my wife was like, she wanted to tie off a few ends in Pennsylvania before we moved down, and she wanted to buy a condo. So this all took time. We like saved money, and
Yeah.
but knowing that I was going there, he started to kind of prep me in a few ways, and he gave me a bunch of titles to read. I read Lasting Purpose by Sid Williams before I went to chiropractic school.
Yeah.
I read the Gonstead case notes, which I don't even know how to get that text anymore, but I read that, and it was all about different cases that Clarence Gonstead took care of. And then I read Chicken Soup for the Chiropractic Soul, which was a
Yeah.
great book. I don't know if you've
Yeah.
ever read that, but it has amazing stories that help you get outside of the box of back pain and neck pain for chiropractic. But the one that was the most challenging, but it helped me find exactly what I was looking for. And I think it was more important to me based on like what it did for me than the actual content within the book. And that was BJ Palmer's Law of Life.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I tried to read that before I went to chiropractic school, and it was really hard. Uh, but I was prompted with like, these are part of the philosophy books on chiropractic. And so then when I got to school, I was kind of looking for avenues that were related to those texts. So helped me find Dynamic Essentials, that helped me find upper cervical chiropractic and the work that BJ Palmer developed. And it helped me have like this well-rounded and foundation that was rooted in tradition within the chiropractic professions. Palmer's Law of Life, I still go back to it now, and it seems like a much easier green book compared to many of the other writings of BJ Palmer. But that was
Yeah.
kind of the first green book, the first philosophy book I read, and the one that got me going to search for a greater understanding of the roots of and tradition of chiropractic.
I love that. And I love the Chicken Soup for the Chiropractic Soul as well. That was something that when I was, before I was a chiropractor, I worked, I did an internship my senior year of college at a chiropractic office, because I had
Mm,
gone to this chiropractor, had amazing results. He was talking to me about me becoming a chiropractor. And I wanted to do an
mm,
internship just to like really kind of get a feel for it. Like, is this something that I can actually see myself doing and would like to do? And
yeah.
I remember reading that book during that time, and it just really helped me to get deeper understandings about the healing that was happening, and to
Mm,
fall in love with it more. And then those green books you mentioned too, those are really wonderful books. Very, very
mhm,
powerful. I didn't read them until after chiropractic school,
yeah.
but they
I read
definitely helped
most of
me.
them after. They're kind of
Yeah.
hard to read during school, and I think I mentioned that last time, but still, that's one of my favorite ones. I like Fame and Fortune and Palmer's
Yeah.
Law of Life. I think it was Dr. Steve Judson. He would always talk about like BJ
Yeah.
Palmer's book started out like this big, like 1,000
Yeah.
pages, and then by the end, it was like 100 pages. This is the point,
Yeah.
It was like the last bunch of books, all much shorter than the initial ones.
Well, that was kind of one of his principles too. Is he was a great speaker and a great like speech writer, and he would
Mhm.
start with these long speeches, but then he's like, he's like, give me, give me a day and I'll have like a 5-page speech. Give me a
Yeah.
week and I'll have a 1-page speech. Give me a
Yeah.
month and I'll have like 2 paragraphs. And it was just like
Yeah.
distilling it down to the essence was something that he really
Yeah.
strove hard to do.
Yeah. His first volumes were kind of ramblings about, his
Yeah,
travels around the world and many of the people he encountered, and it was very fascinating. It gave you a good idea of the man that so much he accomplished so much. And
yeah,
he was a pretty good representative of like what it means to be quote multidimensional and to be like
yeah,
he was a collector, he was an inventor, he was he built all these clinics to test
yeah,
work that he was developing within chiropractic and kind of going up against the whole medical system all at the same time. I mean,
yeah,
very much going at it from many different directions. So I always like to kind of get into the essence of like who was the
yeah,
man, and I feel like that book is the best summary of the principles that he extracted in chiropractic, and it gives a I feel like everyone should at least read a green book, like, and
yeah.
maybe that's a good one to really start with.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really good that the Law of Life, especially because it is distilled down. It's one of the easier ones to
Mhm.
read. Like maybe it's 150 pages or something like that, instead of
Yeah.
700 pages of him kind of trailing into different thoughts. And I always respected that about him as well, where he had that multidimensional aspect where he was like one of the world's I believe it was the world's first x-ray machine. He had the
Mm.
biggest osteological lab in the world. He traveled the world
Yeah.
multiple times, like in the 19 like before 1940.
Mhm.
This is like he had the one of the world's first radio stations, and he used it to promote chiropractic.
Yeah.
Even Ronald Reagan was an announcer, and at one
And
point,
he even made the this is, like, my favorite random thing about BJ Palmer is, like, he invented the food tray that they use in
I was thinking
cafeterias
that.
that kept,
Yeah,
like, compartments, kept your food
yeah.
separated, like, he wouldn't even mix his food, you know?
Yeah, he was very OCD, and this brilliant guy. I mean, this is a guy who would wake up at like 4 or 5 in the morning and start working. This incredible, brilliant research mind, and he didn't like when his like peas touch his potatoes type thing. So
Yeah.
he literally created the food tray that we've all experienced at like school, where it was compartmentalized. You could have your meat and your vegetables, and like how it's just broken into different segments. So
It's
so
so
he
funny.
created that. And another thing that's similar to that I just got a chuckle from was that he had he was a prolific writer, but he like henpecked. So he'd go
Mhm.
like with his 2 fingers typing,
Yeah.
and but an incredibly prolific writer, like writing these books that were hundreds and hundreds of pages. And
Mhm.
don't even know how many books he actually wrote before he passed, maybe 25 or something like that. The average one's probably like 300 or 400 pages. So he was
Yeah.
plus all these
Yeah.
speeches. He's a big writer, and at that time period, everything was on typewriters, and you would have to continually like it was a process to go to the next page. So
Yep.
he developed this
Oh,
spool where it was just like one continuous he could like it was a really
yeah.
long piece of paper, but he could just
Yeah.
type away and he wouldn't have to continually change the paper because when he
Mm.
was doing it, it would disrupt his thought.
Yeah.
And
So funny.
yeah,
He was a character.
oh, it's such a character, so peculiar, but also that
Mhm.
was one of his strengths too. Is just he thought
Yeah.
about things in a different way.
Yeah, he's still like the if you could have lunch with anyone live or dead, like, who would it be? Like, he's up there for me. That'd be a fascinating guy.
There was a woman, Irene Gold, who she taught many chiropractors,
Mm,
helped many chiropractors basically go through the board process, and had this
mhm,
great program that helped you study and prepare for the boards because it's just such a huge volume of information that you're responsible
mhm,
for. And her husband was Reggie Gold, a famous chiropractor, and they practiced, I believe, in New York, New Jersey, and they were really big at the early days when chiropractic was up
mhm,
against a whole lot. And I talked to her one day and I was like, "What was your best memory in all of chiropractic?" And at that time, she was in her 70s or 80s. And she was like, "It was this date, it was in 1940 or something like that." And it was for their honeymoon, she and her husband Reggie, they went to see BJ Palmer speak, and
Mm,
there was people there, and like the parents would have their like kids on their shoulders, so that they could see BJ Palmer. Like he was a
fun.
legend, and
Yeah.
he did everything we talked about, but then he also had a clinic that saw thousands of people like a day. He had close to 20 doctors on staff. And,
Yeah.
that was like just incredible what he accomplished in a lifetime, like 80 years earlier when it was much harder to do those things.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
And stuff.
he had
I
this,
feel like we should bring Simon on and like talk about some of the history one day
I think
about,
that'd be really fun.
yeah.
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 And
Awesome.
one saying that BJ Palmer had that I really appreciate is like early to bed, early to rise, work like hell and advertise. I mean, that's always resonated with me.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
'Cause
good. That
yeah,
resonates with me. It's
it
good.
it is like kind of what you have to do because we live in well, for us as chiropractors and as light workers and energy healers, it's just way outside the norm. And it's
Hmm.
not something that most people just find like on the normal life path of being like, oh, one
Yeah.
day I feel like I need to go see the chiropractor. It's just not built into the society in a way that it is for other things. Like
Yeah.
everybody's going to kind of get streamlined to see a dentist or to go to a medical doctor or those things. But this really
Yeah.
exists off the beaten path in a way. So you do have to it takes a different amount of work because you're
Mhm.
off that beaten path. It's harder for people to
Yeah.
find you.
It's so true.
Yeah.
Cool. What else you got?
So another book that the next one I want to mention is a book called "When the Impossible Happens" by Stanislav Grof. And
Oh.
when I first had my Kundalini awakening, there was a part of me that was afraid I was losing my mind because I started having so much psychic awareness or whatever you want to call it. So my intuition was just going so intensely.
Mhm.
I
Mm.
didn't really realize what happened, but it was very psychologically jarring to me.
Mm.
And there's this book I was trying to assimilate what happened, and I didn't know anything about Kundalini or Kundalini awakenings or anything like that at that time. This is over 10 years ago, and it wasn't really talked about as often. But I came across this book, and it was this guy who's a MD, PhD. His name's Stanislav Grof, and at that time he was like in his 80s. Like 10 years ago, he was in his 80s.
Mm.
I'm not even sure if this man's still alive, but he is a brilliant researcher and a brilliant writer. And
Mm.
he was one of the original researchers for people when they were doing like LSD research, and they would have
Okay.
these so he's working as a doctor and researcher, and they would have these cases where the person was given LSD, and they might start
Mm.
talking in like a language that they never encountered as an adult. So
Mm.
it was these experiences. They'd talk about these different spiritual experiences that this person just had no way of knowing in their conscious mind. And it was like all these really like experiences that just made you question the essence of reality. And for me, it was like,
You know,
oh, like yeah, like like one of the things was him. I remember him going to like Africa and meeting with this tribe, and they did a rain dance, and then how it
mm.
started, like the rain started right after they did the rain dance. But
Mm.
the way he writes and talks is like this is a person who's very logical. It's not like an out there type
Mm.
guy. He was open to different things, but the way he shared his experience, it was extremely well thought out. And for me,
Mm.
it was like, oh, I'm not going crazy. These experiences are a real thing. Like I'm just tapping
Mm.
into something that's most people aren't like it's not a part of normal consciousness for most people. But it
That
doesn't make it any less real.
I've never read that book or heard of that book, but I had a very similar experience with another text. And when I went to Life University, and chiropractic tends to draw a lot of like seekers, I guess you could say,
Yeah.
right? People who are looking for deeper essence of the understanding of the universe, because when you adjust the person and then all this change happens with the force that you created, it gets a person who's looking deeper to start to say, "That's really fascinating. Do this one thing over here, and there's this entanglement
Yeah.
of change that occurs all over the across the board." And I remember hearing, I don't re it might have been Kevin Donka, but I heard this book come up multiple times, and it's called The Holographic Universe. Have you ever read
Yeah.
that?
I remember Christopher Kent referencing it. I don't think I read the
Okay.
book, though.
I did read it. I've read it a couple times, and it was probably the bridge book for me between, um the world is mysterious and like, oh, the world's much, much more mysterious and deeper, and there's hidden
Yeah,
layers that I never. And I remember like if you the first 60 pages are pretty dense, and it goes into like Bohm and some of the people who basically, started discovering and looking at quantum physics, and it's a little hard to kind of understand. And then it hits this point where it just starts
yeah,
going through like these magnificent stories of people's recollection, and having these, I think some psychedelic things in there, but that was only just a little bit. But just like these metaphysical quote miracles and shifts and changes and awareness. And I just remember walking away from that. I was like, well, there is definitely an inner wisdom in many people
yeah,
that is not readily recognized in themselves and in others. And I feel like that book really did open me up to this search
yeah,
for the beyond, right? And that stayed with me. I always wanted to be on audiobook,
yeah.
like because I didn't want to reread it because it was hard, and it is now. So it,
Oh, I love
but it's
that.
real. It was such a good book. Like that one would did the same thing for me, that you were describing. It was a really impactful one that helped me like handle my own search.
Oh, that's really cool.
Hmm.
Oh, I love it. And another book that just popped into mind as you were talking about that too is, The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho.
Yeah.
That's, that's just such a good book, and when I teach Empower the Self class for a long time, I was handing that out to students, as just like
Oh,
as a
nice.
gift at the end of class, because it's just this story, and I don't wanna ruin it for anybody who hasn't read it, but it is one of those classic texts about the hero's journey, and it just
Yeah.
will give you it's a book I've read maybe like 3 or 4 times, and every
Hmm.
time that I've read it, like a different place of life, I've been able to go and get deeper meanings from it. And
That's
there's just the journey that this person goes on, and the all the different steps and where everything leads, and their who they become as a result of that. It's just such an incredible story, and it's easy to read too,
mhm.
and it's a fun read.
That's my favorite book. It's my favorite book.
Yeah.
That's actually the I remember reading, one of Tim Ferriss' books, where he
Yeah.
interviewed a bunch of people, and I think it was, like, The Tribe of Mentors, and I think one of the questions he asked people, like, "What's the book you've gifted the most?" And I remember just reading that question and be like, "I don't have a book that I gift people." And that
Yeah.
actually became the book that I gift people. I'll, like, randomly mail it um
Wow.
to people like, and I remember I didn't read that before I was an initiate, but I read that very much within probably 6 months becoming an initiate, and it was just it
Yeah.
nailed the understanding of becoming yourself
Yeah.
and what that looks like to such a good, in a story, well-told way that it's like my favorite book. So, I don't get that one anymore for, Empower Thyself like I do the, You're Not Perfect the Way You Are,
Yeah. Yeah.
by Sovereign Smith, which is a fantastic book that could just drop a plug in here. But I feel like The Alchemist is, such a good story for people to relate to who,
Yeah.
enjoy story. Like it's it touches on all those, aspects of this deeper learning through story and parable. It's a really good book. I love it.
Yeah. And it's a classic. It goes back to, like, an earlier time in life too, which is like, it's like you're in a totally different world when you're reading it because it's I don't know, it's
Mhm.
set, like, a couple thousand years ago or something like that.
Oh, oh yeah.
Yeah.
Such
I
a
think
good book.
that's probably the most gifted book that I like. I've given that book as gifts to a lot of people. But with
That's
what you
cool.
mentioned too, I also do the same thing now with sovereign systemist Dave Lanyon wrote a book called "You
Mhm,
Are Not Perfect the Way You Are," and it is such an amazing book in terms of hermetic teachings. And we talk about the word hermetic. Basically, what that means is it means purity, and our lineage goes back to Hermes, and that's where these teachings come from. But it's a way of understanding the universe and how basically how the universe works.
mm,
But he teaches this subject that on the one hand seems very simple, but it's that simplicity on the far side of complexity. It's simple in
mm,
a sense, but if you actually get that simple key, it unlocks an entire world for you. And he's
mm,
this like he's a master of hermetic understanding, and he is able
mhm,
to like he shares so many spiritual keys in such like in like a 200-page book or 150-page book.
mhm,
Like he packs it in terms of spiritual keys. And when we say spiritual
mm,
keys, it means like if you understand basically like there's an understanding, and maybe that understanding is like 2 sentences long, but if you understand this concept, you're going to be able to see and experience the world in a different way. It's going to open
yep,
up new ways of thinking as far as your mind and soul and
mm.
experiencing different energies. Um,
I love that.
yeah, and so like he shares probably hundreds of spiritual keys in this book,
Mhm,
and it's just the amount, like the density of spiritual understanding that he puts in and makes it in a way that's easy for people to absorb
mhm.
is better than any other book that I know for the modern mind and person.
Totally. Yeah, it's very practical, and it also has that way of just opening up the like, "Oh, I've heard that, but I never looked at it like this."
Yeah,
You have many of those moments where if you read a part of it in isolation, you could have read that so many other places, but it does something different in the context of
yeah,
where it is and what's surrounding it, and the metaphors and stories that kind of bring it to life, that it helps really anchor in this understanding that we've known to be true, but haven't fully heard it in the context of that book, which is
yeah,
really, a really good book for just I've read it a couple times, and going back through, and as a spiritual guide and teacher, it really helps us kind of make greater sense of what we teach, and then
yeah,
our own awareness of our own progression. So it's a really good book as well.
yeah.
Super good.
It's super good, and it's like it's not from an idealistic perspective. It's just like this is how the world works, and
Yep.
this is how like this is how life works. And then
Hmm.
as like you understand it, it's like okay, like if life does work that way and it's really true, it really simplifies things
Hmm.
because
Cool.
otherwise it can be like things should be that way. I know I used to do this a lot, where it's like the world should be this way, people should think
Mm,
this way, and the world would be there'd be so much less suffering if people just thought this. But that train of thought just is kind of leads to misery because it just wasn't how people were. Like you have to accept reality, which is one of the things that he talks about in that book.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
he goes deep into that concept. But like he really helps people to understand how the world works, how the mind
Hmm.
works, how the soul and spirit work, and then how those
Hmm.
things interconnect, and you can use them to create a really good life.
Yeah. It's really
Yeah,
good. Cool. We probably could go titles across the board, but I feel like I have one more to talk about to wrap up. But what else? What else do you have that you feel
I
is
have like
relevant?
two more that I feel
Two
are
more.
good.
Okay, then you
Okay,
you present yours first.
okay. So here's the book, Man's Search for Meaning. Have you ever read this
Oh
book?
yeah.
Yeah, it's
Gosh,
by
I feel
Victor.
like I don't think I did. I think I own it though.
Oh, you would love this, bro. It is really good. It's so this guy, it was a psychologist, and he was a Jewish psychologist, and then ended up in the Holocaust at a concentration camp, and went
Mm,
through this like these incredible horrors, uh, and like just the worst of the worst experiences you can go through as a human. But what
Mm,
the lessons that he learned and what he took from it, like, are just absolutely incredible. And on one hand, like your heart is like being wrenched because of what he was put through and all these other people. Which, even though like it's something that we're all aware of, it's like we still get kind of disconnected from how bad that actually was. Uh, but like the spiritual lessons that he took from it, and like how he came to peace with it, like how
mm,
he went through that level of despair, and then
mm,
like came to peace and
mm.
wholeness. And it's just like it's a book that if you read it, like it moves your soul in a huge way.
That's
Like,
cool.
yeah,
That's awesome.
okay.
I feel like that was one of Matt McCoy's favorite books. Maybe I'm wrong. And I had the professor. I feel like that was one of the books he really enjoyed, but I can't recall.
It's also it's a good book because it is like written well more in the form of story, but it's like 120-page book, or
Okay.
150-page book.
Hmm.
Yeah, so
Nice.
it's it's really good.
Okay. My last one is kind of a business book title, but I picked this because it shows where people are.
Mm.
So I'm a big fan of the Trapped series by Gino Wickman, but one of the newer books is called Shine. Where is it? Shine. And this one is about the 10 disciplines for maximizing your energy, impact, and inner peace. And it's newer. So it's the 10 principles. It's interesting to me because this book is about, quote, finding your true self. And it comes at it from an entrepreneurial perspective. Um, and the kind of the true, it's looking at like the true self, your energy, your DNA, being driven by who you truly are, and then like the practical understandings that are very relevant to spiritual path and progression. Like the impacts are 10-year thinking, so long-term thinking, taking time off, stillness, know thyself is a
Yeah,
chapter, knowing your 100%, saying no, preparing every night, putting everything in one place, being humble. And there it extracts a lot of like spiritual
yeah,
lesson for a business book, and it shows where the current entrepreneur actually is they're not just trying to get rich quick, and then it's about longevity and doing it from a place of authenticity of the self. And I mean, even having chapter know thyself, and it starts talking about, on the temple, above the temple doorway in ancient Greece said know thyself, right? In this
yeah,
book. So for me, it was like very fascinating that a system that I was drawn to, a business system, is speaking some of the same language that people have been talking about through ancient teachings and spirituality for ages. It's showing up in the mainstream understanding of how to have a good life and good business, and you shouldn't try and compartmentalize those two, but they should actually be come together.
yeah.
Yeah,
That's great. That's great wisdom.
yeah, yeah. It's a really good book, and when I'm reading it, I was like, oh my gosh, somebody who wants what this book has to offer would definitely be searching for, to maximize themselves. They'd be trying
Yeah,
to maximize the self for sure.
I love that. Uh,
Hmm.
to For me to wrap up, there was just to switch gears. Like I love the epic stories. So like I've
Hmm.
loved the Lord of the Rings. I've loved I've read all of them multiple times, and some other epic series too. Like I like the epic fantasy series where it's like the characters really develop, and the unlikely heroes and unlikely
Hmm.
heroines. These battles of like these epic battles of good versus evil. Like I went through the Wheel of Time series last year, and I really enjoyed that. But probably my favorite series right now is the Spellmonger series by Terry
Hmm.
Mancora, and
Yeah.
it's this guy who's this unlikely hero, and the situations like there's a complexity to the world that they are in, and there's this like incredibly difficult situations, but the way that the characters have humor and to think
Hmm.
outside the box, like in the all the dynamics going on, it really helps me to be better able to navigate difficult situations in life. Like
Mm,
to not just think about them in the normal way. Like it
mm,
helps me to have that adventurous spirit, if you will, uh,
mm,
and also to just not get trapped in the normal way of doing things as a human. Because one of the
yeah.
things that all these different like stories have is this hero's journey where
Mm,
there is a process of the unlikely hero, and then there's the circumstance that causes them to go and like leave their comfort zone, and then meeting the
yeah.
mentor, and then all the challenges and difficulties along the way, but how that forges them into this higher version of themselves. And I think that
Awesome.
some of those stories, like they do it in a really great way. That's an incredible model for us.
Yeah. I mean, that's good. We've always loved story. Like people are
Yeah.
attracted to story. Um, and I am starting to read a little bit more. You got me. I started reading one of those books
Oh, you
last
did?
year.
Awesome.
Yeah, yeah, I have them on my Kindle. I think I got into it and then I departed.
Yeah.
But I've been attempting, if you will, to read more fiction, because my daughter obviously loves fiction. I'm reading
Yeah.
nonfiction to her, but we love those stories and those trials and tribulations and overcoming, and that have wired in our DNA. That's why we love these movies so much, right? When people
Yeah.
overcome and accomplish and save the world and save themselves, because that archetype has always kind of been um, how we root for the self and each other, right?
Yeah. And when we talk about things like Lord of the Rings, like it may seem disconnected from our everyday life, but if you
Yeah,
look at it, you're like, okay, this is one of the most successful book series and like TV series and or movie series of all time, like
yeah,
across all these different cultures, because of the way
mm,
it's like speaking to archetypes and this hero's journey. And
yeah,
like, so
yeah,
it's really it speaks to the soul of humans, I think. And there is this aspect of what we're here to do on this earth that it speaks to that we otherwise
mm,
can forget. And just like
yeah.
with the normal humdrum and mundane aspects of human life. So
I love it.
it helps us to remember our own like magic and greater purpose, I think.
Yeah. So there it is. There's our titles to help you progress and to grow within this year. I'm sure we could even do like a health one down the line. Like we both,
Yeah.
consumed a lot of material from that, but this was a fun one coming off of the last one. And I'm curious, as a listener, what titles or texts people have read that they think we should check out down the road. But I mean, we have so much. I know we're both big readers. Like I think I read somewhere between 10 and 25, 30 books a year. Like that's what it usually works out to. And I really enjoy it. Like it helps me put down the phone and put down
Yeah.
technology and just kind of get immersed and get lost. So these have been very helpful titles. Hopefully our listeners enjoy them. Give them a shout. I don't know how many we had in total, but we'll list them all in the notes so people can find them. We don't receive any proceeds from it, but we hope you enjoy these titles and they help you grow.
And please share with us too the books that have impacted you the most, whether it's it can be personal development, it can be from a unique genre. But yeah, let us
Hmm.
know what you enjoy.